Dimitri's footsteps echoed in the stillness. No laughter, no warmth, just an oppressive silence that clung to him like cobwebs. His heart pounded against his ribs, a drumbeat of unease in the suffocating quiet. He had yearned for this silence, craved the solitude of his home. Now it felt like a tomb. The air hung heavy, thick with an unseen menace. Shadows stretched from the corners, twisting into grotesque shapes as he moved. Every creak of the floorboard, every sigh of the wind against the window pane sent shivers crawling down his spine. He had expected peace, a sanctuary from the storm raging within him. He found only an unsettling stillness that spoke of something far more sinister. He pushed open the door to his daughter's room, his heart clenching at the sight of their untouched toys. A wave of nausea washed over him, the scent of lavender and vanilla suddenly suffocating. He stumbled back, the weight of his lies, his betrayals pressing down on him, threatening to crush him. This home, this family, it was all built on a foundation of deceit, held together by the fragile threads of his carefully constructed lies. Dimitri had spent years building his empire, amassing wealth and power. He had clawed his way to the top, leaving a trail of broken promises and shattered lives in his wake. He had told himself it was all for them, for his daughters, to give them the life he never had. But the lie tasted like ash in his mouth. He had believed he could outrun his past, that the darkness wouldn't follow him home. He had built walls of money and influence, convinced they would keep the shadows at bay. But shadows, he was realizing, were insidious things. They seeped through the cracks, slithered under doors, and whispered truths in the stillness of the night. He had tasted power, felt the intoxicating rush of control. It had promised him everything, whispered of a world where he could rewrite his story, erase the stains of his past. But power was a fickle mistress. It demanded loyalty, extracted a price in blood and bone, and Dimitri, blinded by ambition, had paid it willingly. A floorboard creaked behind him. He whirled around, his hand instinctively reaching for the weapon he no longer carried. A figure stood silhouetted in the doorway, shrouded in darkness. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through the numbness that had been his constant companion. "Who's there?" His voice was a raspy whisper, barely audible in the heavy silence. The figure didn't move, didn't speak. It stood there, a silent sentinel, its presence radiating an almost tangible menace. The air crackled with tension, every beat of Dimitri's heart a deafening roar in his ears. He strained to see through the gloom, but the figure remained obscured, features lost in the shadows. "What do you want?" Dimitri's voice was stronger now, laced with a desperate edge. Still, the figure didn't answer. It took a step forward, and the shadows seemed to cling to it, moving like living things. A cold dread seeped into Dimitri's bones, icy and relentless. He knew with chilling certainty that his past had finally caught up with him. "Do you recognize me, Dimitri?" The voice, when it came, was a low rasp, devoid of emotion, chilling in its calmness. It cut through him like a shard of ice, shattering the last vestiges of his composure. He knew that voice even after all these years. It haunted his nightmares, whispered accusations in the darkness. The figure stepped into the light, and Dimitri staggered back as if struck. The face that stared back at him was etched with pain, eyes burning with a cold fire that sent shivers down his spine. It was a face he had tried to forget, a ghost he had hoped to outrun. But some sins, he realized with a growing sense of dread, could never be outrun, only atoned for. "You took everything from me," the figure continued, each word measured, dripping with venom. "My family, my life, my future. You left me with nothing but ashes and pain." Dimitri's carefully constructed world crumbled around him, the weight of his lies crushing him. He had known this day would come, had seen it in his nightmares, felt the phantom touch of retribution on his skin. "What do you want?" Dimitri choked out, his voice hoarse with terror. The figure's lips curled into a humorless smile, a chillingly familiar gesture that sent a fresh wave of fear through him. "An eye for an eye, Dimitri, a life for a life." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken threat. Dimitri's blood turned to ice. He knew what the figure wanted, the price of his redemption. He looked towards his daughter's room, his heart a lead weight in his chest. "Choose," the figure hissed, the single word echoing in the silence. "Your life or theirs. One for the many you destroyed." Dimitri closed his eyes, his breath catching in his throat. He was trapped, caught in a web of his own making. The silence stretched, each tick of the clock a hammer blow to his soul. He had made his choice, sealed his fate years ago. Now he had to live with the consequences. Dimitri's choice was a whisper, a broken plea for mercy. He knew it would change nothing, that some debts could only be repaid in blood. But a father's love, even one twisted by guilt and fear, could drive a man to beg for the impossible. The figure's laughter, cold and devoid of humor, echoed through the house, a chilling counterpoint to Dimitri's despair. "Your sacrifice changes nothing, Dimitri," the figure spat, the name like acid on his tongue. "But it will serve as a reminder. You will live with this, every sunrise, a testament to your sins." Dimitri crumpled to the floor, the weight of his guilt crushing him. He looked down at his trembling hands, seeing not the wealth they had accumulated, but the blood they had spilled. His daughters, their innocent faces, swam before his eyes, their laughter a haunting melody in the deafening silence. He had condemned them to a life haunted by his sins, their innocence forever stained by his actions. The figure lingered in the doorway, a spectre of vengeance about to melt back into the shadows. "You will remember this night, Dimitri," the voice rasped, heavy with the weight of sorrow and fury. "Every breath you take will be a reminder of what you have lost, of the price of your ambition." And then, with a final chilling glance, the figure was gone, swallowed by the shadows as if it had never been. Only the echo of its presence remained, a lingering chill that seemed to permeate the very walls of the house. Dimitri was left alone with the consequences of his actions, the silence now a deafening cacophony of his guilt and despair. He was a prisoner in his own gilded cage, the bars forged from his lies and betrayals. The house that had once been his sanctuary now felt like a tomb, the air thick with the stench of his sins. He was buried alive under the weight of his past, every beat of his heart a painful reminder of the price of his ambition. Dimitri remained on the floor, a broken man amidst the ruins of his carefully constructed life. The silence pressed in on him, suffocating, filled with the ghosts of his victims. He was surrounded by the trappings of his success, yet he had never felt so utterly alone. His wealth, his power, it all felt meaningless now. Dust and ashes in the face of his overwhelming grief. The house was silent, devoid of life, a stark reflection of the emptiness that gnawed at his soul. He had built his empire on a foundation of lies, and now it was all crumbling around him. The price of his ambition had been his soul, and in the cold light of dawn, he realized he had paid it 1,000 times over. He was left with nothing but the echoes of what could have been, the phantom laughter of children he would never hold again. He was a ghost in his own life, a hollow shell, haunted by the memory of the man he used to be, the father he could never be again. And as the sun rose, casting long shadows across the blood-stained floor, Dimitri knew that his punishment had just begun.